I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's Friday 5. I'm your host VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I want to talk to you about markers your food reactivity test should include. And by going through these markers, you're going to understand more about how food reactivity can affect you and why understanding how food can affect you is absolutely vital in improving your autoimmune symptoms and hopefully getting to a point where you can live symptom-free. Because foods can trigger inflammation in those who are susceptible, and there are different ways that food can create inflammation in the body, and that's what these food reactivity tests, and I'm calling them food reactivity tests on purpose because there is a difference between a food sensitivity, a food intolerance, and a food allergy. And I have written an article on this which I will put the link to in the show notes if you want to go through the differentiation there, and I believe I have got an earlier podcast episode on that as well, so you can have a listen to that too, because there's quite a lot involved in understanding the different reactions. But today I want to talk to you about how these foods specifically cause a reaction in the immune response, and that's why I'm using the word reaction, because I am talking about food sensitivities, food intolerances and food allergies today, and all of those can cause reactivity in the body, which can cause the immune system to fire up and create inflammation in the body. So let's talk about the first marker, and this is the IgG response. And I like to look at the IgG response as a delayed response to a food. Sometimes you might get a response quite quickly, say within a couple of hours, and then other times it can take a lot longer for you to see the effects of this type of food sensitivity, and that's why keeping a food and symptom journal is so important. For the most part, a lot of the food sensitivity tests that you see on the market will be testing for IgG, and it's important to understand whether you have IgG. IgG stands for immunoglobulin G, and that is an antibody in the body, and what it is showing you is that you have these IgG antibodies to food. So we know for whatever reason your body is creating antibodies to that food, and when you have antibodies present and they begin to be fired up by the immune system, because the immune system tells your body that there is an issue, then that's when we can get an inflammatory response. And that's what those IgG antibodies are telling us, that you have this reaction to food. There may be a link between these IgG responses and chronic inflammation and autoimmune flares, and there are various reasons for that. There's a process in the body called molecular mimicry, where your body may be firing up against a certain food, and that food may have a similar pattern to a pattern on a self tissue, and as a result of that your immune system fires up against both of them. It can also cause chronic inflammation, and when chronic inflammation is present, that can also cause destruction to the body as well. So there are various ways that works, but I see IgG as that delayed response that can happen with food sensitivity, and that's what those food sensitivity tests will be looking at. The other antibody that is tested is IgG4, and this is fairly new. I have started using a new test in my clinic, the P88 dietary antigen test, which actually includes a few of these markers, which is great because you get so much more insight when you're looking at lots of different markers. And again, if you'd like to learn more about that test, I will put the link in the show notes about the testing package that I have. But the IgG4 response is another type of IgG, and what they have found with this IgG4 response is it's more of a subtle response in the body, and elevated IgG4 levels can indicate a complex regulatory response going on in the body. And we know how important those regulatory T cells, so the part of the immune system that keeps everything in check. And these IgG4 antibodies may play a part in that, which is why they're so important. And when it comes to autoimmune disease, you may see is that somebody may have very raised IgG4 antibodies, and that might be an indication of a maladapted response to a persistent exposure to that food, and that's why taking that food out can help with symptoms. So it's a new marker that isn't often tested in a lot of the food sensitivity tests, but it is tested in that PATA dietary antigen test that I have started using in my clinic, and I'm finding it really helpful so far. And clients that have done that test and taken those foods out have found that their symptoms have improved and their inflammation has gone down. The next marker is IgA, which I'll call the gut guardian because it is the antibody that is in the mucosal membrane of the gut, but also in other areas like the mouth and the eye, and it helps to protect your immune system at that barrier. And we know that if you have raised IgA in response to food, then you are having some form of food reactivity at those mucosal barriers. And we know when it comes to the gut, if you have inflammation in the gut, it can lead to conditions like celiac disease and other inflammatory bowel disease. And that is why understanding whether you are having an inflammatory response at the gut barrier rather than just systemically and in the blood like we see with IgG is important. And the Cyrix panel that I use, the Array 10, looks at your IgA response as well as your IgG response, which again can be extremely helpful because you know which area of the immune system is firing up more against those foods. And this is particularly important for autoimmune conditions that affect the gut. As I said, things like celiac disease and inflammatory bowel disease, but as part of this, it may also contribute to leaky gut syndrome. And we know that's a risk factor in lots of different autoimmune conditions. The next marker that's tested is IgE, and that's that immediate response that we get to food. And IgE is the antibody that when it encounters an allergen, it activates mast cells and basophils. And as a response to that, you will release a lot of histamine and other inflammatory substances pretty much straight away. And that's why you get those symptoms quite instantaneously, and that can cause things like hives and itching and watery eyes and a runny nose and all those symptoms that we associate with allergies. That is that IgE related response. And it might be that you're getting an IgE response and an IgG response and potentially an IgA response. And that's why understanding how these foods are affecting your immune system is so vital, because the approach that I'm going to take as a clinician is going to be different whether you're having an IgE driven food reactivity response or an IgG food reactivity response. And some clients will come to me and they may do the IgG food reactivity screen, the food sensitivity screen, and they find a food that they're not reacting to. And they tell me, well, as soon as I eat that, my eyes start watering. And that tells me that, okay, so you might not be having an IgG response, so that delayed response to the food, but you're likely having this immediate response, and that is part of this histamine response. And it can lead to histamine intolerance. And for those that are genetically susceptible, having foods that create this IgE response is going to mean that their tolerance to histamine in the environment and in the other foods they eat is going to be far less, and they may end up with chronic histamine symptoms. And I'm seeing this a lot at the moment because a lot of people think about the IgG response when they're thinking about food reactivity, but this IgE point is absolutely crucial as well, especially if you're getting that immediate reaction after food. And last but not least is complement. And what complement does is it intensifies a reaction because it's part of the immune system which is supporting the immune response, and it's almost signaling to the immune response what type of reaction is required in response to whatever your immune system has decided is a threat to your body. And when it's activated by certain foods, it enhances immune signals and can dramatically increase inflammation, which is why, again, it's important to test for complement. And that's what I love about that P88 dietary antigen test. It tests for complement. And in the past, I've had to test clients for complement in a separate test, which is fairly expensive just to test for complement alone. And it's worth knowing whether you have raised complement when you have an autoimmune condition, because the whole premise of an autoimmune condition is that you have this intensified immune response, and often people's complement will be higher if they have that type of autoimmune response going on. And sometimes I find that complement is low, to be honest, and that's a different mechanism going on in the body. But when it comes to food sensitivities and food reactivity, knowing whether the complement is also raised in response to that food is going to tell you about the type of intense reaction you're going to have from that food. So you may have IgG responses to lots of different foods, but if you have an IgG response to, for example, a banana, plus you have complement to a banana, you are going to have a very extreme reaction to that. Whereas you may have IgG response to a kiwi, but you don't have complement. And that might be something that you can live with, especially if you're in good health. I mean, if you are looking to recover from an autoimmune condition or an inflammatory condition, any inflammation is going to have a knock-on effect to your symptoms. So that's why we take out some of these reactive foods for a period of time, build up your body, and then reintroduce them in the proper way so that you can include as many foods in your diet as possible. And that's why I love testing to understand what foods you're reacting to. The elimination protocol that you can do is fairly restrictive, and it may not be the food that is triggering you, and that's why testing just gives you that insight instead of a lot of trial and error. I tried elimination protocols in the past where I took out, for example, dairy, gluten, and other foods, and that was helpful, but it did feel quite restrictive. And then I did a food sensitivity test. This was fairly early on, and realised that actually I was reacting to lots of foods that weren't even on the elimination protocol. So I was probably helping myself to a certain amount, but I really needed to take out some other foods to see the full benefit of that. If you have any questions about these markers that I've spoken to you about today, or if you've done any testing and you found these raised and you'd like to ask me some questions about it, then feel free to pop over to my Instagram account, which is at theautoimmunitynutritionist.com. And if you would like to join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum, I would love to see you over there. We have lots going on in July, which I will be sharing with you shortly. We have a nutritional essentials to beat fatigue, which is on the 17th of July, and I will be sharing lots of tips and advice over on the forum, so I'd love to see you over there. If not, have a fantastic weekend, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.